Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for being with us on a Sunday afternoon. Really nice to see you. Today, we're going to be hearing from Melissa Walker of the States program. She is going to be giving us just a lot of information about what the States program is, and it will help set the stage for what 31st Street is pivoting to in the next few months, which is creating slates of legislative candidates in specific key states. Jim is working on that with our state team leaders, and he will be talking more about that. So we're shifting away for the moment from funding grassroots groups, and we will be meeting actual candidates over the next few months on our meetings. And raising money for specific campaigns and specific candidates in legislatures, state legislatures. But before we get into the program, just a quick intro. I am doing something a little bit different today. I'm going to have my husband, Dre Samuelson, do a little bit of an intro. He is here, but before he says a few words, I just want to say a few words about him. He is usually in the background on 31st Street, but when I married him 21 years ago, I was not in politics, really had nothing to do with politics. I'm a psychologist, and Dre had been working on the Hill for decades. And when I first met him, we were one of the first Match.com couples, by the way. When I first met him in Union Station over an iced tea, I was not really particularly interested in politics, to tell you the truth.
Or me.
I had canvassed a little bit here and there, but it just wasn't, I was focused on individual distress, not country distress, and was always wanting to help people, but on the individual level or family level, not the state or country level. So it was a whole new world that Dre introduced me to. And he'll say a little bit about what he did, but he just to give you a little thumbnail sketch about Dre Samuelson, he is from Nebraska, and he has been doing political work in South Dakota for decades and decades. And for those of you who do not know about the Midwest, who are from the East Coast or the West Coast, the Midwest is, there's a lot of red states in the Midwest, and South Dakota and Nebraska are two of them. And I found it sort of mysterious that this man had helped elect Democrats in red states over and over and over again. That was mystifying to me. And it has been mystifying to me the whole time I've known Dre that he has not given up. He has not given up trying to make these red states more democratic. Not necessarily more blue in terms of all the candidates that win, but more blue in terms of their laws, more blue in terms of how they run. Despite the fact that his efforts don't always win, or they often don't win, he is still at it. He's still at it. He volunteers an incredible amount of his time out in South Dakota and Nebraska, and he's out there many months of the year, and I'm in DC, or I'm visiting my grandkids, or I'm wherever. But that's our contribution to democracy, is we live apart part of the time, and we are still married, going strong. So that is my little shout out to Dre, and I'm going to let him say a few words to introduce this meeting.
Well, thank you, Lisa. You took about half my speech here, but that's okay.
I did not.
So, as Lisa said, my name is Dre Samuelson, and I am indeed her husband. When we were married more than 20 years ago, I was clearly, as Lisa said, the political one in our family. I'd spent most of my adult life in politics, working 3 years for then Congressman Tom Daschle, and 28 years working as the only chief of staff that South Dakota U.S. Senator Tim Johnson had in his entire congressional career. And as Lisa's husband, I was present at the very beginning of 31st Street, which started with about 25 people in our living room, all fueled with the same deep concern about where our country was headed. And like Lisa, determined to do more about it than just write angry posts on Facebook. And I've never really told her this before, and now she's hearing it for the first time. As an experienced political person, I really had my doubts about how effective all this would be. I mean, I recognize that the idea was good, but I had never seen people band together in a group and get anything done. I mean, it was revolutionary to me, but here we are. But I especially never dreamed that this tiny little group would eventually become the largest swing left chapter in the entire country, as well as the most productive. Many of you folks have heard what I'm about to say before, but I believe it's important to note and celebrate our accomplishments, because that helps all of us get over the inevitable bumps that we occasionally feel. We contributed more than $11 million to Democratic candidates and grassroots groups, knocking on tens of thousands of doors, writing and sending hundreds of thousands of postcards and letters, and now we have more than 1,600 members all over the country. As I said, I'm an optimist, but I'm not easily astonished, and the work of our group is, by any measure, astonishing. And it's not only amazing, but as many of our members have said before, 31st Street is the antidote to hopelessness and despondency. We've proved that everyday people like us acting together can achieve remarkable goals. And in fact, before everybody got on this call, Mary Pence said that the only thing keeping her out of the loony bin was 31st Street. So, I mean, it's good for a lot of reasons to help save democracy, but also to help save our collective sanity. But we obviously can't rest on our laurels. We have much more work to do with enormously high stakes. And that work was underscored last night when I attended the Tom Daschle staff retreat in downtown DC. This was obviously the last time all of us would get together. Tom is 76 now, and all of us are obviously getting on in years too, so it was quite an emotional experience. In his remarks, Tom and others had appropriately talked about how much we collectively had accomplished, how it was almost unbelievable that he even won his first race for Congress in 1978. I worked on that campaign, and when I went to bed that night, it was very clear that we had lost, clear to me at least. But when I woke up, to my surprise, I found a note from my roommate said that we had closed the gap and were only 42 votes behind. We then went through a laborious recount, which we ended up winning by 139 votes out of 130,000, or about 1/10 of 1%. And like our first 31st Street meeting in our living room, no one would ever have believed that Tom Daschle, who barely survived his first House race and was from little, mostly obscure South Dakota, would eventually rise to become the Democratic leader in the US Senate. I learned then if you dream big and work hard, oftentimes good things happen. And that's exactly what happened with Tom Daschle and what has happened with 31st Street. At the conclusion of Tom's remarks, he went somewhere that I at least didn't expect. Instead of giving us a happy talk ending, which is what I did expect, congratulating all of us on a job well done, which, I mean, he did do that to some extent, but this is what he closed with. He said this, and I'm going to just read it. As important as all the things we accomplish together are, they will mean very little in the end if we don't win this election, which is literally the most important of all of our lives. I hope this evening will be a reminder of the incredible journey that we've had together, but I especially hope that it motivates us to do all that we can to ensure that our democracy stays strong and that the future of this country stays bright, because that is exactly what's at stake. Wise words for sure, but I'm going to conclude by quoting the words that one of our 31st Street swing left members, Sam Maruca, told me at lunch 4 years ago, and this is what he said. If there was ever a time to empty the bank, literally and figuratively, it's now. That pretty much says it all. Back to you, Lisa.
Thanks, Dre. And now over to Jim, and we'll be moving on with our program. Thank you all for being here.
Wow. So as you can tell, Dre is really great to work with. And in addition to this inspirational sort of level, he has a lot of good political insights to pass on to us as well over the years. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm the political analyst. I think pretty much everybody knows me. I'm just going to go ahead as usual and share my screen, run through some slides before we get to our great speaker, Melissa Walker from the States Project. I'm just going to hit a few high spots to start off with. You all pretty much know this, maybe not all of it, but it'll get us going. I think people pretty much know that after Trump's conviction, the polls have moved slightly in our direction, and maybe that'll be the start of something better, but they're still very, very tight. And infuriatingly, of course, Trump is getting a huge amount of money, both from his base and also from a bunch of billionaires, it seems. But money isn't everything. And when that happens, it only wants me to give more money. So that's my response. We got this debate that's coming up. I'm not really even thinking about it. I'm just hoping that Trump's what I call unhingedness will come through and people will see how bad he is, and it will actually penetrate. I will say that my understanding, and some of this is based on some direct conversation, that the Biden campaign really is much better deployed with the ground game. You know, Trump's getting a lot of money now, but it's also sort of late in the game. And it takes a while to get your ground game and other kinds of things going. And I do think the Biden campaign is actually, in terms of the avenues that it's doing better, doing things before. The other thing is there are all these allied Democratic organizations, starting with the DNC, and my sense is that they also are doing better than their Republican counterparts. And part of that is that our Democratic Senate candidates that we need to get our trifecta, they're all polling at least reasonably well. And this is just one thing I saw this week in terms of some data. You know, a number of us think that digital is very, very important and becoming increasingly important, digital outreach to voters. And in this arena too, the Democrats are doing a much better job, at least in terms of the amount of money that's being spent across the digital platform. Although notice that in Pennsylvania, they're almost spending as much as we are, and that does worry me because maybe they, we have to win Pennsylvania, so that's all the more reason for us to be prioritizing Pennsylvania. Okay, so what do we do with these things? Of course, this is our motto: we keep our foot on the gas until we run out of gas. And that's what I'm doing, and I'm hoping the rest of you will do with me, us, I should say, not me. And this just sort of again summarizes our trifecta strategy. Basically, our swing states, mostly doing it through infrastructure building and by state parties and grassroots groups. But also state legislatures that are so important. And that's what we're shifting to now, as Lisa said. All right, so where are we now on the last part of our grassroots efforts? Well, our goal has been 320,000. I know Mary will want to see this. So we are actually over 301,000, as I saw something come in just now. So we have about 19,000 to go. I believe that we have enough. I don't want people to not contribute. I still want, and I'm going to put a contribution link in the chat, but we're not going to be pushing for this right now. I think we've got some commitments and so momentum. We'll get to that. And so we'll be able to move on to our next phase. And of course, this is so important that these groups have money. They've been getting money, and it's helping them do the work that they're already doing. All right, and this is just our kind of our scorecard. We've got all the stuff we've done together. We're finishing up the grassroots groups, and now our next thing we're going to want to do is Pennsylvania and North Carolina state legislature. We're doing them partly because they're nearby and we know them and so forth, but also because these other states, other than Nevada, which I'm still not sure if we're going to do, they still have primaries, but we're getting poised to do them also. And total funding to date now, I actually didn't think we'd get this far this year, but we're at $1.5 million. Who knows how far we'll get. Now, I did want to talk, shifting from fundraising a little bit for the moment to talk about this great candidate we have in Pennsylvania, House District 10, Janelle Stelson. We've been talking about her. Lisa has in the newsletter. And in terms of the ground game, I think we have a real opportunity to be working for her. And here's the opportunity. She's actually very well known and she's appealing. She was a former newscaster. So a lot of people know her in the district. That district, even though I'm trying to remember, I think it's about a Trump +5. It's definitely trending more suburban and educated in our way. And it's now been, 4 years since then. The odious Scott Perry of January 6th opprobrium is very unpopular. I've heard that my own limited canvassing to date in the district. 3 polls have showed her on average only down 2. And the last one only down 1 in terms of the average of 2, but latest one only down 1. She's got a significant fundraising advantage. Interestingly, Scott Perry's never really raised much money. He's a notorious non-fund. One of these people doesn't raise money. He may get help from Republicans in the state, but on his own, he's not. And you have an advantage when you, as a federal candidate, when you raise your own money, you get a much better deal on television time. It's nearby for our canvassing. We have so far gotten a lot of cooperation from the campaign to do the kind of canvassing that we like to do, which is dense turfs, lower income, diverse neighborhoods that we think are the most productive and the most enjoyable kinds of canvassing. And at the same time, we support her with our canvassing. We'll be supporting, of course, Biden and Casey. And some of you may have seen or heard this. NPR had a recent piece on this. There's actually, I don't know how potent they are, but there's a group called Republicans Against Perry that's working with Janelle. Obviously, she needs some Republican votes as well. All right, now I want to spend a little bit of time on where we're going with the legislature races. And I've included 5 of them. So notice that we have the ability, we collectively, to flip 4 of the houses, including more recently, we didn't think Pennsylvania Senate was going to be necessarily a possibility, but I'm beginning to think we actually have a chance there. Wisconsin, we have new districts. We have a chance to flip the House. We don't have a chance to flip the Senate because there are not enough houses up. But we can get in a position to flip it in 26, which could give us a trifecta. If we do that, we can pick up redistricting. We can pick up U.S. House races in Wisconsin. So important. Arizona, 1 seat away in both the Senate and the House. We want to increase our majorities in Michigan and Pennsylvania. And of course, North Carolina. We have this horrible legislature that's running roughshod over people in North Carolina. And then also, very importantly, why I've got these red plus marks here is that we feel really very fervently that when we're supporting these legislature races, they're the ones that know the people in their districts. They're the ones that do the most canvassing in their districts. And when they turn out voters, they'll turn out voters for the most part that will help us statewide. So where are we going in terms of our next Pennsylvania and North Carolina? We're going to have a slate of 8 candidates each. And we're going to have this fundraiser on July 24th. The actual goal for that, we haven't decided yet, but I'm going to try to make it something that's useful for these candidates. One of the things that's actually important to realize also is that if you raise some money for these candidates, it makes a difference. It moves the needle. They don't have that much money for the most part, and especially if we get it to them reasonably early like this. And I'll also say that we've been interviewing some of these candidates in North Carolina and Pennsylvania. And I'm impressed, we've talked to a lot of candidates over the last 8 years. And I'm impressed that we're getting some really high caliber candidates in those states that are gonna help us. Okay, now here comes the point I know you've all been waiting for. It's kind of the inevitable thing, which is that we need people to be co-hosts. And I see my sister Mary smiling. And I think on the orientation this afternoon, we actually maybe already have the first co-host pair that are gonna work for us to do this. And that's the secret. That's why it works. And that's what we really need to do. More on this, of course. So I did see that Melissa Walker, who's going to really go into a lot more detail about why legislatures are important and that she's a co-host. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Melissa.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks everyone for having me here. I'm delighted to be with you all. I always admire the work of 31st Street and how strategic it is. So I wanted to just share a little bit about my story and why I think that state legislatures are the focus and why people who invest in state legislatures and in winning state legislatures are the most strategic political donors in America. So I hope to bring those points home today. So again, my name is Melissa Walker. I am the head of Giving Circles at the States Project, but to be honest, I still think of my career as writing children's books. I write young adult and middle grade novels, and I worked in teen magazines for a long time. And that's what I was doing in the fall of 2016 when Trump was elected. And in that moment, I'm sure like many of you, I felt like there was a fire raging and I needed to put down everything I was doing and find a hose. And I was lucky enough just a month later to attend a holiday party where then New York State Senator Daniel Squadron was speaking. And the things he said that night really turned my world around because I started to understand that everything that I was worried about domestically under a Trump presidency was being decided in state capitals and not in Washington, D.C. From education funding to environmental policy to healthcare to civil rights to the very core of our democracy, voting rights, and of course, gerrymandering, the drawing of the district lines that decide who goes to Congress and decide who goes to the state legislature, all in the hands of state lawmakers. And I know you all know this too, but most folks aren't aware of it. I started to connect the dots on a bunch of things that hadn't made sense to me back then, things like the bathroom bill, which passed in my original home state of North Carolina and then passed in 20 some other states. I started to recognize, okay, that was people in Raleigh who did that. And things like the Stand Your Ground gun law, which passed in Tallahassee and let Trayvon Martin's murderer go free and then passed in 26 other states. I started to realize like, okay, that was people in Florida. I don't know any of their names. And things like the Flint, Michigan water crisis, I started to realize that's a Lansing problem, not a Washington, D.C. problem. And all of those things, of course, happened under an Obama presidency. And we see it today. We have Biden in the White House, but we watch state after state after state ban abortion, limit voting rights, ban books, ban what, change what's being taught in schools. And that is because of those right-wing majorities that have hold of state capitals. So in doing a little more research that year, I started to realize that from 2010 to 2016, the right wing had flipped nearly 1,000 state legislative seats, flipped from blue to red. And in those states where the right wing took power in state houses and state senates, they made people's lives bad. They defunded education, they put in right to work laws, they gutted environmental protections. But people didn't say, oh, that must be my state legislator. Let me go down to Main Street and talk to them, because most people have no idea who goes to their state capital for them. And I will admit that I consider myself among that crew that fall of 2016. I Googled who is my state senator on the way home from meeting Daniel Squadron and realized I had never heard of the person who was going to Albany for me. My state assembly person I knew, but only because I saw him at the Y sometimes. So I started to realize that there were these 50 mini Congresses across the country that are foundational to our democracy, but that largely operate in darkness because of the decimation of local media and because the spotlight is on Washington, D.C. And the thing that gave me hope that night, though, when I heard Daniel Squadron speak, was a sentence that I think is really relevant to you all's work as well. It is often cheaper to change the balance of power in an entire state chamber than it is to win a single competitive congressional seat. Congressional races cost millions and millions of dollars, but state legislative races do not. They are still small, they are still local, and they can still be won with the brass tacks tactics of a campaign manager, finance director, some time to knock on doors, some flyers, some good ads that go on digital and television. It's not three-dimensional chess, it is Connect Four. And when we know which tipping point seats we need to shift power in a state legislature, and when we target them specifically, we can absolutely move the needle, as Jim said, in these races with rooms like this, and rooms even with much smaller capacity than this one has, than 31st Street has. So that sentence really galvanized me. And I started a giving circle of my own, one that's much like 31st Street, in fact, to focus on targeting state legislatures. And over the years, we at the States Project have worked in many of the same states that 31st Street has worked in. We work with the campaigns and the caucuses, and it has been an incredible ride. In 2022, we were the biggest we'd been, and we were involved in 59 races that were decided by fewer than 1,000 votes. And I'm sure, because you all worked in these states as well, that you're familiar with some of these numbers, but I love saying them. We were able to flip both houses in Michigan, the state house and the state senate, by fewer than 400 votes each, to give Governor Whitmer a trifecta in that state that has enabled Michigan to codify the right to abortion in the state and pass free breakfast and lunch for public school children and end those right to work laws so that unions can be strong again, and pass the strongest climate bill in the country, stronger than New York's or California's, in Michigan, because of a one-seat majority in each chamber that was won by fewer than 400 votes. Minnesota is a state where we were in 2022, and we were able to flip the state senate by one seat, 191 votes. That has enabled a trifecta in Minnesota that has been able to do the same things as Michigan, and the press was calling it the Minnesota miracle when they started passing policy. This is how quickly things can change in a state when we win majorities, even on these small margins, even one-seat majorities. And Pennsylvania, which I know is a big focus for you all this year, we were able to go into Pennsylvania in 2022 and needed to flip 12 seats. And we got all 12. And the final seat was won by 63 votes. Power in Harrisburg shifted by 63 votes. And that enabled the Pennsylvania House Dems to elect the first Black woman Speaker of the House, Joanna McClinton, who is incredible. One more thing about these power shifts that we are able to make possible when we focus on state legislatures is this. We do have a slate of candidates in those tipping point seats, and we work in those districts well ahead of primaries to make sure that everything's ready to go. But it's less about the candidates in those tipping point seats and more about who becomes the leader in those chambers once we win. The Speaker of the House, Joanna McClinton, the Speaker of the House, Joe Tate in Michigan. And the reason that's important is those are races that are in blue districts. And we are not with them electorally. And I'm sure neither are you focused on them electorally because they're going to win their seats. What we can do for those folks is win them the majority. So what's really significant about this power shift, in addition to all the policies that are changing, is that when you go from the minority, where you have a parking pass and a front row seat to what's being done in the Capitol, to holding the gavel, that's when you wield real power. And in Michigan, Detroit holds the gavel now. And in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia holds the gavel now. And that changes everything about what policies come to the floor, whose constituents are represented, and how we can shift things in these states to pass policies that are improving people's lives. So I'm going to wind down and say that I'm going to wind down with a four-parter. So I'm going to talk for a couple more minutes, and then I'd love to answer questions or just any comments, happy to take them. I'm not talking too much about the States Project's works today. I just wanted to cheer you all on for focusing on state legislatures. And here's a four-parter about why. If you care about the kitchen table issues that I mentioned at the beginning of my talk, you have to care about state legislatures. Last year, Congress passed about 30 bills. Michigan passed 321. This is where the rubber meets the road on policy. This is where we improve people's lives. These are the foundations of our democracy. This is how people live on a daily basis. It is their state governments. If you care about Congress, you should care about state legislatures, because state legislatures draw the district lines in 70% of the country that decide the playing field for who goes to Congress. If you care about the Supreme Court, you should care about state legislatures, because not only does the Supreme Court not write laws, but they rule on laws, many of which are coming out of state legislatures. It was a Mississippi law that took down Roe, and if that one hadn't done it, there were 16 other states that had queued up abortion bans right after Kavanaugh was confirmed, with the explicit purpose of rising up to challenge Roe. And if you care about the presidency, you should care about state legislatures, because not only does state legislatures decide who can vote and when and how and when to purge the rolls or change polling places, but also because the path that the Trump team tried in 2020 to steal the presidency ran directly through state legislatures. It wasn't senators and congresspeople that Trump called to the Oval Office in December of 2020. It was state legislators from Michigan, from Pennsylvania, from Arizona, and he was asking them to change their electoral college slates and their electoral college votes to help him win their states, because state legislatures are in charge of their state elections. So this is a place where we can focus and really move the needle on races that we're going to win on the margins, majorities that we're going to win on the margins, and they have huge consequences over all the everyday issues that we care about and over federal power and election integrity. So it is a wonderful place to focus. It is not where the glamour is, just where the power is. It's where the right wing's been building for decades. And I'm just so glad to have you all in that fight for state legislatures too. Thank you for having me come say hello today.
That was great. I don't know if you had all that written down, but I want to take chunks of what you just said to put in the newsletter, because it's concrete information that's easily understandable, that just makes the work so compelling. I'm so glad we're going to be backing it up. If people have questions for Melissa, please raise your hand or put them in the chat.
I'm trying to think of something to ask because it's not only is it so cogent, and she rattled off all this important, including the electoral college. There's these subtleties about when the legislatures meet and the electoral college that, you know, actually end up, as we know, having there are two states, right? Did you say this, that actually the legislature, there are three? Okay, what are the three states that?
Yeah, so Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, and Nevada all seat their newly elected folks before the safe harbor deadline. That's what you were talking about, Jim?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so whoever wins this November will be the people who are in place before they send the electoral slates over. And we've also come to realize that there's a second danger date, which is January 6th. So ahead of that certification, there's also a bunch of other states that do, but those three are real focuses for us.
So here's a few questions, Melissa. Can you speak to the Senate races in Pennsylvania? This speaker is surprised that there's a chance we can flip it.
Yeah, so I'd love Jim to speak to it too. Actually, I'm curious to hear what you all have analyzed. Our analysis is that we believe we can tie the state Senate this year. So half the seats are up. We think it's possible to get to a tie. And that is a good power shift, actually, because then the lieutenant governor has say, the lieutenant governor is a Democrat. So that would be an actual power shift. And then we think set us up for a flip in 26 that would get us the more solid trifecta, as long as we can defend the House. But curious if you all have a different analysis.
Well, that's what I consider. To me, a tie like that is the flip. Yeah, that's
yeah.
Okay, and this is a question I guess Melissa and maybe Jim could speak to it. Could you summarize the concept of power in the USA as top down or bottom up, or the proportions of how to understand that?
This actually makes me think of, I'm going to call up, we actually have a presentation about, I'm not sure, I think this is speaking to your question. We really feel like to focus on the top of the ticket all the time, as many folks are wont to do, is really shining a chimney on a house with crumbling foundations. And the foundations are these 50 mini Congresses, where so much policy is made and so much of the foundations of our democracy live. It also happens to be true that there is a lot of power in state legislatures that is completely unrecognized. And I'm trying to pull up a document. Actually, we have a document that kind of presents that that argument in terms of how much control over the budget for various things state legislatures have versus Congress. So let me pull that up for a minute. I don't know, Jim, if you have a response to that too.
Well, I mean, the other thing comes to mind too is there are states where the state legislature really dominates, in a way, the governor to some extent. So in North Carolina, it only takes 60% to override a veto. The governor has no say in redistricting, for example. And so there are other states that have similar arrangements as well.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. So, I mean, one example to speak to that specifically, we are actually working in Kansas this year to try to break a right-wing supermajority for a Democratic governor, Laura Kelly, because under those supermajorities, she has no veto power, right? Her veto can be overturned because of those supermajorities. So a couple of years ago, I know you all probably remember, folks got really excited about the fact that Kansans came out and voted against abortion bans, right? That was on the ballot and people came out and they said, absolutely not. Well, the legislature passed some anyway. And when the governor vetoed them, they overturned her veto. So breaking that supermajority, which is just getting 2 seats, actually makes the governor powerful again. It's not a state where we think, oh, we can shift power in the legislature. That's not going to be possible. But there is a path to a power shift that's not a flip. And so looking for power interventions like that, breaking a supermajority, building a budget majority, all these smaller power interventions are really important too, especially for empowerment of governors. And in Nevada, our goal is actually to build a supermajority against a right-wing governor who vetoes everything so that we can overturn that veto. So yeah, absolutely. It's really a bottom-up situation.
Looks like Doug has a question, Lisa.
Yep, I see that. Melissa, you mentioned that during the Obama administration, we lost some 1,000 legislative seats across the country, a huge number. Was this because the Republicans chose quietly but effectively to do exactly what you are advocating now?
Well, so they didn't even do it that quietly, to be honest, right? It was called Project Red Map, which is like a really obvious name for what they were trying to do. And Karl Rove was writing op-eds about it in the Wall Street Journal. He wrote one that was called He Who Controls State Legislatures Controls Congress. And when I started learning about this, I was like, did anyone read this? Did anyone see? The plan was very, very public. And it really was, yes, taking power in state legislatures so that you can control Congress and so that you could control the kitchen table issues and change laws in states and deregulate for big donors. And the truth is that, yes, in many ways, we are sort of following their playbook to target those, the seats that we need. But we're doing it a little differently, right? They had a kind of a cabal of 5 billionaires who got together. I mean, in 2022, for example, in Michigan, the States Project and our Giving Circles program was the top donor to the Michigan House Dems. The top donor to the Michigan House Republicans was the DeVos family. So they do it with a smaller number of people and greater amounts of dollars. But yes, it is a similar map, a similar plan. And yeah, I never thought that be following the Kochs, but they had a good plan. And I suppose they are inspirational in tactical ways.
Another question, can you talk a bit about what you see as the effective outreach to get these candidates elected? Posters, radio, door-to-door, TV, digital, what are they using? What are you using to get these folks elected?
Yeah, I love this question. So we have, when we go into a state, we partner locally with a partner on the ground who is most often the state caucus. That's the entity that's focused on the legislature. And our goal is to really get these races in the tipping point seats to be better funded and use more effective tactics. And so we bring a suite of tactics in, and I'll just mention three briefly to keep it tight. One is we, like every state caucus, to hire a local press consultant. And their job is to get local press for candidates in the tipping point seats. Everything from small town newspapers to neighborhood rags to church bulletins, anything that's going to up the name recognition for these candidates. And a local press consultant focusing on those races is a small expense that can really change the game in terms of name recognition. Another thing that we do is we like our caucuses to run to ad test their ads. So we know that campaigns spend a lot of money on digital and television ads, running those ads. And we want to make sure that they're resonating, not just nationally, not just statewide, but actually locally with the voters they're trying to reach. So ad testing is another tactic that we bring in. And the third one that we bring wherever it's allowable to do this is we run a candidate door knocking challenge. And Pennsylvania is a great example of this. We get numbers every month every week from the caucus. And every month, the candidates who are in our tipping point districts who have knocked on the most doors, the top 4 get additional campaign contributions. And so it's really incentivizing getting out and personally knocking on doors rather than sitting in an office and dialing for dollars and tying dollars to those doors. This is really important, especially in purple districts, because field teams are incredible for get out the vote, but the candidate is the persuasion knock. The candidate coming to a door and talking about grass on the softball field and cracks in the sidewalk and the local school is the thing that's going to cut through Fox News on in the background or a national negative feeling and make the person a neighbor. And so we really want to reward and incentivize that behavior for our candidates. The other piece of our door knocking challenge, which we actually just added in 2023 in Virginia, is something called clinch cards. And that is the candidate, when they knock on a door and make voter contact, puts some notes in their van file in their software program, and can be everything from has a really cute little dog, has a great shade garden, talked to me about the school down the street. And then that person gets a postcard a week or two later from the campaign that says, hey, we met a couple weeks ago. Your dog is so cute. I can't believe you keep that shade garden in such great shape. We talked about the local school. When I get to Harrisburg, I hope we can work on this together, that kind of thing. That is, we call it a clinch card because we really feel like it's a very good tactic for clinching a vote. And then that house will also get a card when early voting starts that says, here's your polling place. And remember, we met on the doors this summer. Those are the types of tactics that aren't scalable, right? You wouldn't use them in a presidential or even a Senate race, anything statewide. It's too big. But in these races where we're going to win, I don't know, power in Pennsylvania by 63 votes, these are the kinds of tactics that can really move the needle and that we want all of our candidates really working on. So those are the types of things that we invest in these states. And there's no silver bullet in these campaigns, but if there were, it would be the candidate personally knocking on as many doors as possible.
Great answer. Gosh, that's, I think people who are working on campaigns are taking notes. I hope they're taking notes. So we're going to take 2 more questions from Melissa. I know Dre has one and Barbara Woodall has one, and then we're going to pivot to just a couple of other things we want to share. And then we'll take some questions that were in the chat for Jim about the earlier part. So Barbara's question is, would you talk about how Republican legislators use draft legislation? From Alec, A-L-E-C.
Yeah, thanks for this question. So I am on the electoral team at the States Project, and then I often forget to talk about our other side, which is we have an entire policy team too. And I'll share in the chat an article about that. But we do have a policy side, and honestly, it's probably somewhat started in response to Alec. So Alec is the American Legislative Exchange Council, and you all probably know this, but just in case, they really what they really do is they launder corporate bills and hand them to state legislators to pass things like the Stand Your Ground gun law, which actually wasn't written by people who really believe in gun ownership. It was written by gun companies to sell more guns. And so those are the kinds of things in model legislation that pass through on the right. We have at the States Project a full policy team that works with caucuses on setting agendas and passing policies that improve lives. And we have a policy library on our website, actually on the States Project website, that that is for it says for lawmakers is the button to look at. And we have a library of model bills as well, because we want to help state legislators who are in 40 states, part-time job that pays less than $20,000 a year, right? No staff often, sometimes not a lot of policy expertise themselves. And so that support is really necessary. And it has a long time been built up on the right, less been built up on the left. And so when I talked earlier about Michigan passing all of those things, one of the reasons why they were ready to go is because our policy team has been talking with them since 2018 and saying, let's get ready to take the majority. What are the priorities for Michigan? And helping everyone come to the table and get ready to be the yes vote on those things so that we can move things quickly together and not have in caucus fighting. It's a really important piece of this because, of course, the goal is not to win elections. The goal is that there are new majorities that are focused on improving people's lives and passing bill after bill after bill in order to do that. And if you look at our site, you'll see 7 broad goals, things like investing in children, empowering people over special interests, clean air and water, things that any human would nod their head at. Under those goals are targets that we'd like every state to try to hit. And those targets are things like ending hunger for 100% of households in the state, ending mass incarceration in the state. Under those targets are the model bills that we have evidence to prove moves you towards those targets. And so that's the framework for this. And that's what we ask state lawmakers to look at and prioritize what is right for their state, and that we give support on doing that.
Thank you. One more question, Dre.
Thanks, Melissa. I agree with Lisa and others that was a very compelling presentation. It's one of the best I've heard in being at these meetings for a long time.
Thank you.
I totally agree that it makes a lot more sense to contribute to state legislative candidates than it does most Democratic federal candidates who, if they have a decent chance to win, they're going to be overfunded, frankly. But can you talk a little bit about why it's better to give funds to state legislative candidates than it is to give funds to grassroots nonprofits that focus on registering and voting likely Democratic voters, which helps every candidate from top to the ticket to the bottom, including legislative races? I mean, I think I think is where the tension is, in my opinion. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, so I really come from like theories of abundance places. And so I really don't try to talk people out of one or the other. Like, I do feel like if you're investing in things that, you know, that you believe in, that you've kicked the tires on, that you've heard about in this group and others, I think it's great to invest in multiple places and do everything we can, leave it all on the field, as folks have mentioned earlier. So I don't think that there's, you know, that there's a one is better. I mean, in terms of those two things, I don't think that one is necessarily more strategic. Although I will say that something that I think is really important that I have learned over the years about state legislatures is there is so much power. We used to have a sign on our office door that said, not where the glamour is, just where the power is. And that gets more deep for me every year, because I truly believe that state legislative majorities in the hands of the right wing have been able to undermine things like voter registration, have been able to undermine things like closing polling places, purging rolls, creating new rules, just maneuver around the structures in a way that I think is more powerful than almost anything else. Georgia is a really good example of this. Georgia has had some of the best organizing on the ground, some of the best voter registration efforts, some of the best things going on. And of course, we are able to win Georgia at the top of the ticket, right? It's been organized, groups have been organizing to win statewide. And so Biden can win Georgia. We can win those 2 federal Senate seats in Georgia. That's incredible. That's amazing. At the same time, there are still supermajorities in Atlanta, because if we're not organizing to win the state capital, then they still have a lot of power to next time purge more folks from the voting rolls, close a few more polling places, make it even harder to register people to vote or take people out of lines at polling places. And that kind of power undermines a lot of the other things that we're trying to get done. So I see state legislative majorities as a place to not only pass great things, but also stop a lot of that messy shenanigans, because states have control over local districts, they have control over voting laws, they have control over the electoral places, and they have that lever over federal power too. So for me, it's just the most potent place to try to win. But I do understand that there are other things that are really important and valuable for everyone, but that's kind of one way that I think about them.
Thank you. Okay, Dre, take that.
Well,
So
I
we
mean, I
need
don't
to
just,
move on though. Sorry, I gotta cut you off because we need to move on because we're almost out
Okay.
of time. We have a couple other things to do, but
okay,
you guys can debate later. So I'm gonna call on our the person putting together some canvassing in Pennsylvania, Michelle Heimbach. She's previously on our leadership team, but she's still our honorary leadership team person. So Michelle, can you speak to what's going on in Pennsylvania?
Yes, and I can keep it short because Melissa and Jim have already done an excellent job of setting this up. And I just want to talk about field work because, like many of you have said, 31st Street has been my antidote in the last few years of putting worry aside and actually doing something. But getting out and making phone calls or getting out and knocking on doors and talking to voters is what I think of as doing democracy. And I always come home after a shift feeling so much better than I did when I left. And I just want to encourage you all to try this, especially if you haven't done it yet. And I never talk about activities unless I've field tested it myself. So the first thing I want to talk about is phone banking for a Pennsylvania state legislative candidate. Hadley Haas is running in a district west of Pittsburgh. And she's in a district that's represented by a Democratic congressperson, but both the incumbent state house person and state senate person are Republicans. It's a district where the number of Republicans and Democrats are sort of evenly divided. I think there's about 18,000 of each. So it's flippable, but it's going to require an awful lot of turnout. And right now what we're working on is name recognition through the phone banks. So I did it this past Wednesday, and I've got another one set up for this Wednesday and one for July 10th, 5 to 7 p.m. If you've never made calls before, this is an easy way to learn how to do it. We've got a great campaign staff person who is on the line who will train you. And you use an auto dialer, your phone number is masked, you have a script. Trying to think of what else makes this appealing. I spoke to 6 people in an hour of phone calls. And while that may not sound like much because there are a lot of wrong numbers and there definitely were some hangups, speaking to 6 people in an hour is more effective than when you drive 5 hours and you may only speak to 6 people in an hour. So it's really a good use of your time. And at this point in the process, a lot of what we're doing is cleaning up lists and making it more effective for later on. So when the candidate, her staff go out and knock on doors, they know where the Democrats are and who to speak to. So that's one option if you'd like to join me this Wednesday or on July 10th. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is canvassing for Janelle Stelson, who Jim spoke about a little bit earlier. That's in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. My husband and I and a group of about 15 people already registered. We're going up on Saturday, the 29th. We're going to start about 10:30 in the morning, which from where I live in Bethesda means leaving around 8 a.m. or 8:30. And when we knock on doors for Janelle, who's running to unseat, as Jim put it, the odious Scott Perry, we're also turning out votes for the state legislative candidates in those districts. And there are many of them. And most of them are represented, most of that area is represented by Republicans right now in the state house. So it's a lift, but it's really, really important to do. 31st Street has other dates lined up for this summer to canvass for Janelle. We have July 13th, the 28th, August 10th, and the 24th. And then after Labor Day, we'll be going out every weekend. So I hope to see your sign up soon through Mobilize. We have links. I think Lisa or somebody was putting them in the chat as I speak. So thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. So I just put in Michelle's email if you are interested in the phone bank on Wednesday or July 10th. And if you want to sign up for the canvas, the link is in the chat. It's also going to be in my newsletters. It's also is it also, I think, on our website. So, and you can always just email me if you're confused about something, and I will connect you to whoever you need to talk to. Okay. And we have a question. We're recording this. How do you get access? Or I will put the Zoom link of the recording in the newsletter. So it usually goes in the newsletter several days or a week later, because we send it to somebody to edit it down.
It's also in the website.
Also on the website. Also, we have a YouTube channel, 31st Street Swing Left YouTube channel. You can find every event we've ever recorded. Okay, so we do have some questions that are sort of more open mic questions, like from way back in the beginning. Let me go back to that, and you can also, you know, continue asking questions. But Melissa, just wanted to thank you again for coming. That was fantastic.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. One question was, Jim, can you explain the new FEC rule that allows more C4 PAC coordination that Republicans are going to utilize and Democrats are not? Know anything about that?
Well, that's from our friend George. It's actually a dark money thing. It's not any of those things that you listed. It's a dark money thing, and apparently the Republicans think they can run more money through it than the Democrats. Actually, because I saw it was dark money, I didn't really pursue it anymore. Other people may know more about it than I do, but it'll, you know, this is something actually that Mark Elias, who's the Democratic sort of voter protection guru, wanted for the Democrats also to have. So there's some benefit to us. I think it's a part of the way that Trump wants to sort of run his ground game. But that's all I know about it.
Okay, and there's a few questions, and we get these now regularly. Jim, what are your thoughts about Maryland and Hogan?
Okay, so I live in Maryland, and I'm not wild about Hogan at all. I know there are a lot of people that live in Maryland that will want to work very hard for Angela Brooks. I think she's going to win handily. And that's just not my sense of Maryland and so forth. There was a decent poll in early May that showed her winning over Hogan by 10 points. And, you know, if anything, I think her position's gotten stronger. So we'll look, you know, we'll keep an eye on it. And, you know, but I at this point, I think that, you know, there's no, you know, obviously people are going to want to work for her and so forth. That's fine. But I think our efforts will be spared that and can be directed elsewhere.
Okay, and then some people who came in late are just wondering, are we funding the state's project? Not currently funding. We really thought Melissa could help everybody understand why supporting legislative races is so important, but we may.
So let me say a couple of things. One is I really like the state's project. I interact with them a lot. I feel like, and I feel like what we want to do is complementary to them. And I'm very happy if people want to donate to them, by the way, and as I do myself. But I think if we actually have candidates that we bring out that will make the case for them, that will end up, you know, having more impact than this more sort of abstract kind of thing about the way they operate. I love the way they operate, but I think we can become, and there's one state of Michigan where I think there are campaign limits where they've actually told me they much prefer us to be doing direct candidate support because they're limited in what they can do in Michigan.
Okay, great. I'm just strolling through. If anybody has a question and I'm not getting it, just raise your hand and
let me go say one other thing about our interaction with the state legislature. Somebody was asking about, I guess it was Catherine. When we talked to the campaigns and the campaign managers, you know, we've had like 8 years of experience working with state legislature races. And I feel like we know some lessons learned about how, and actually I feel like we have very good constructive conversations with those campaigns. One of which is radio, which is just one of the things that was on Catherine's list, which is making sure that they're, thinking about radio, thinking about spending their money early, thinking about reaching out to low propensity voters. All those kind of lessons that we think are really important. We get the opportunity to sort of make the case for that when we talk to them. Over.
So if there's any other questions, we're at 5:04, so we're probably going to say goodbye. But if there's a burning question that we haven't gotten to, wave at me. I'll see if I missed you. I don't see anybody waving. All right, well, that was fantastic. Thank you for being here. I'm going to talk to everybody I know about state legislatures, even though we've already been supporting state legislatures.
Let me say one other thing about Dre, in terms of timing, we supported the grassroots groups first because we thought it would take them more time to get mobilized and hire up and get going. The campaigns, we know we prefer to provide money for them early also. But the timing of the way they operate, it actually makes more sense to be providing them money later in the cycle. Partly because in 3 of our key states, they still have primaries that have to happen. So I think Dre's coming around a little bit.
Well, I absolutely agree with that. You don't want to, we don't support people in primaries, nor should we. My view is I absolutely agree giving money to state legislative candidates or this project is way better than most federal candidates. But I don't think it's better than giving money to grassroots because when they register people to vote, they're going to vote up and down the ticket, not just for those state legislative candidates. That's
yeah, but when those candidates go out and knock those doors, they're the best persuasive thing we've got going for us.
Well, they'll be knocking doors no matter what, won't they?
Well, if they get more money, they spend. Now, actually, the part of the reason why they do this contest is because the candidates spend much too much time. Oh, there's Melissa's still here. She's nodding. So they instead of all this call time trying to get money, when they've got more money, then they can do more door knocking, and they get the incentive to do that.
Yeah, I will say in Pennsylvania in 2022, the candidates who were involved in our door knocking challenge knocked on 5 times as many doors as the candidates who were not. That is thousands and thousands more doors knocked. And when we're winning on those small margins, it can be the difference maker. And the other point that I wanted to make, actually, sorry, we can talk offline too, Dre, if you'd like to, but what happens with voter registration is that it's often organized to win statewide. In fact, most grassroots groups are organized to win statewide. It's like how they're funded and how they're organized, which is great. It's really important to win statewide and those races. We are always looking for grassroots groups that are targeting by state legislative district, and we have a lot of trouble finding them. So registering voters in blue state legislative districts is great for statewide, but isn't going to achieve our goal, which is kind of exclusively and narrowly, some might say to a fault, focused on shifting power in the legislature. And that is really key for us. And we have a hard time finding groups that overlap with that type of targeting. So
let me say, we're still raising money for Ohio, and we still need a little bit more for Ohio and Arizona. So anybody wants to contribute, including you, Dre, we're happy to take your money. Thank you.
I'm sure you are.
Okay, well, thank you. And thanks for stimulating debate. And I have a feeling Dre is going to contact you, Melissa Walker, and soon he's going to be your Facebook friend. I promise you that. Okay, everybody, thank you for coming. This was great. And we'll see you soon.